Hi everyone! Today we are going to be using what we learned about shapes, foreground, and background to draw a realistic pumpkin patch that has lots of depth. So let's get started. We are going to need a piece of white paper turned horizontal or landscape style. We are also going to be using a black crayon. Now, if you don't have a black crayon, you could always use a black colored pencil or a black permanent marker. If you're using a black permanent marker, make sure that you get your parents' permission and your parents' help. We don't want to use a black Crayola or washable marker for this project, and I will tell you why in a little bit. So I'm going to get started, and I'm going to use a black crayon for this step. Again, you have the choice between a black permanent marker, crayon, or colored pencil. And what I'm going to do is start drawing my very first pumpkin in my pumpkin patch. I'm going to do that first by using my finger to trace the outline of a tall, skinny oval. It's always a good idea to use your magic finger to trace what you're going to draw first if you're not using pencil. So I'm drawing a rainbow shape or an upside down U to start, extending my lines down and rounding them off at the bottom to a curved line to create a big, long, tall, skinny mini oval. Now what I'm going to do is again use my magic finger to trace and practice drawing my other oval. Now this oval is a little bit different though. It looks like it is behind my first oval. This is called overlapping. So my first oval is overlapping in front of my second one. I'm going to do another oval on the other side. That one also looks like it's hiding behind my first oval. And I'm just going to do the same thing one more time on each side. So I'm doing the same amount of ovals on each side because I want my pumpkin to look symmetrical. When something's symmetrical, it means it's the same on both sides. So now let's talk about that pumpkin stem. I could just draw a simple rectangle, but I want this stem to look more realistic and three-dimensional. I'm going to draw an ellipse, which is just a squished circle. It's also just a sideways oval. And that ellipse is the top of my stem. Now I'm going to draw a curved line down from my ellipse to my pumpkin, and another curved line down from my ellipse to my pumpkin. That creates the size of my stem. There we have it. We have a big realistic pumpkin in the foreground of our picture. Now let's draw a horizon line. I'm drawing a curved line near the top of my pumpkin in the background. Now this horizon line is a line that separates the earth from the sky. Now it really looks like our pumpkin is in the foreground. So, I'm going to add some pumpkins in the background though. I think I'm going to add maybe just one pumpkin. I'm going to add it over here, I think. And I'm going to use the same technique that we talked about drawing our first pumpkin, but I'm going to draw this pumpkin a lot smaller, starting with my oval and adding my other ovals on either side. Now, things that are in the foreground of a picture always look really big, and things in the background get smaller and smaller and smaller as they go back into space. So, this pumpkin in the background is very teeny tiny. I want you to make sure that you include at least one pumpkin in your background on your horizon line that looks a lot smaller than your pumpkin in your foreground. This creates depth in our artwork. I just drew a big old full moon in my sky. You could draw a crescent moon, a half moon, even a sun. It is up to you, and I want you to be creative. If you want to add more pumpkins, feel free, or whatever you would like to your artwork to make it your own. So now what we're going to need is a orange washable marker, a cup of water, a paintbrush, and if you don't have a paintbrush, you could always use a Q-tip. So if you don't have an orange washable marker, this part will not work. You can just color in your pumpkin with what you have, like a crayon or a colored pencil. Now, with my orange washable marker, what I'm going to be doing is using the thick part of my marker to draw a nice thick line on the left side of each of my shapes that I used to draw my pumpkin. So a nice thick line. I'm actually doing a couple thick lines here. I want to make sure that half of each of the shapes that I drew are filled in nice and thick. We don't want those thin, skinny lines. That won't work. Nice, thick lines is what we need. I'm going to speed this up a little bit, but I am taking my time making sure that I am, again, using nice thick lines on the left side of all of my shapes. This middle shape, this middle oval shape, I made a little bit thicker of a line. Here we go. Okay, finishing up there. All right, boys and girls, are you ready for the magical part? Because I think I'm ready for the magical part of this art project. We are going to need our cup of water and our paintbrush. Remember, if you don't have a paintbrush, you could also use that Q-tip. And I'm going to take my water and I'm going to take my paintbrush, and I just want to review with you something that I call dip, dip, swipe, swipe. That is a technique that we use to make sure we don't have too much water on our brush. Dip, dip, swipe, swipe. Now I have just the right amount of water on my brush. And I'm going to touch my brush where my marker is and drag some of that paint or that marker gently into the white space. Now, this creates almost something that I like to call marker paint. So again, I have some water on my brush. I want to make sure that I'm not using too much water because, well, what do you think will happen? Well, if we use too much water, it can rip a hole in our paper, it can ruin our artwork, so we want to make sure that we're careful and use the dip, dip, swipe, swipe. Again, I'm dragging some of that marker paint right into my white area, making sure that I'm careful. I'm not pressing down too hard. I'm just touching my wet paintbrush onto the edge where my marker is, and then painting over my white area. And by doing this, I'm creating different values of orange. I have darker values of orange and lighter values of orange. This also makes our pumpkin look more realistic. Now, the reason we didn't use black washable marker to draw our entire landscape is because, well, if we add water to washable marker, it will do just this. So that's why we used a permanent art supply. There we have it. My pumpkin is complete. I have darker values of orange and lighter values of orange. I'm going to do the same thing on this back pumpkin, but first let's tackle this stem. Now I'm going to use a green washable marker and just trace the left areas of that stem, leaving some area white so that I can use my paintbrush or Q-tip to drag some of that color into that white area to again create different values or different shades of green. Now we learned about what value was last year, but let's review. Value is the lightness or darkness of a color. By adding value to our artwork, again, it makes it look more real. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to my pumpkin in my background, just tracing the left side of all of my shapes that I drew for my pumpkin, carefully adding water using the dip, dip, swipe, swipe technique. And now what I'm going to do is just color in my background. I'm going to use some zigzag lines with crayon for my grass. Now, you color it in how you would like. Just make sure that you carefully color. Make sure that you take your time and make it look awesome. I'm going to speed this up and I'll catch up with you in a moment to show you my completed art piece. Alright boys and girls, here is my completed artwork. I have my grass, my sky, and my moon colored in. Now I'm just going to add one final finishing touch. I'm going to use a green crayon to draw these spiral lines coming off of the stems of my pumpkins. Now, these spiral lines represent tendrils, which are actually on real live pumpkins. So there's my completed art piece. Please make sure that for this artwork that you have one big pumpkin in your foreground and at least one smaller pumpkin in your background. We want to make sure that your artwork has lots of depth, so please make sure that you follow that rule, that things in the foreground appear big, things in the background appear small. Also make sure that you take your time with coloring in your background, and most importantly, have fun. I can't wait to see your pumpkin patches.